In the early hours of August the 6th, 3 B-29s head towards Japan. On board the Enola Gay is the bomb Little Boy, containing 141 pounds of enriched uranium. The target, Hiroshima, a city of 350,000 people. At 8:15 a.m. during the morning rush hour, the atomic
It took about 45 seconds from the time the bomb left the airplane until it exploded. And I think there wasn't a man in the airplane that wasn't either timing it with his watch or counting or doing something. I was sure the bomb was a dud. I was sure it wasn't going to work.
After falling for 43 seconds, the time and barometric triggers started the firing mechanism. A uranium bullet fired down a barrel into a uranium target. Together, they started a nuclear chain reaction. Solid matter began to come apart, releasing untold quantities of energy.
It explodes 1,900 feet above the Shima Hospital. A burst of neutron and gamma radiation emanates out, along with deadly shock waves.
At 8:14, it was a sunny day. At 8:15, it was a hellscape.
What happens on 6th of August is absolutely shocking.
People and life were vaporized, incinerated. Many died from massive doses of gamma radiation.
In less than a second, 70,000 people are killed.
The super hurricane force wind flattened buildings in instants.
The giant mushroom of smoke rises from the 5,500-degree firestorm.
Nothing in the human experience had prepared anybody for such totalizing damage so instantaneously.
Beyond Ground Zero, the human devastation is unprecedented. 13-year-old Setsuko is in her first class of the day.
I saw the bluish white flash. I had the sensation of flying up in the air. I woke up in the total darkness and silence, and I started hearing faint voices. They were saying, "God, help me. Mother, help me."
Setsuko is relatively unscathed. Her sister Ayako is not so lucky.
My sister and her child were burned, blackened and swollen. Just a chunk of flesh melted, just unrecognizable.
By the end of the day, thousands more die from radiation injuries.
And when the darkness fell, we just sat on the hill and watched all night the entire city burn.
Setsuko loses 350.
Within the first seconds of the bomb detonating, extreme infrared energy was released and instantly burned exposed skin for miles. The soft internal organs of all life evaporated. Neutrons and gamma rays start to hit the ground within the first few milliseconds of the blast, the ionizing radiation that will claim many lives in the days to come. The blast wave spread outward at speeds reaching 7,000 miles per hour, driving a fireball that would consume much of the city's buildings. At the center of the explosion, temperatures would reach 7,000 Fahrenheit. Broken glass and all manner of debris is sent flying, cutting through those unfortunate enough to be caught up in the deadly tempest. The telltale gigantic mushroom cloud forms visible for miles. With such a destructive force, it is no wonder that between the two bombs, some 150,000 people died instantly. What made matters worse is that the doctors, nurses, and medical staff were largely wiped out by the blasts. It is estimated that 90% of the doctors in Hiroshima were instantly killed or injured, with only 3 of the 45 hospitals unaffected. This only exacerbated the crisis that would follow the detonation. Whilst the initial blasts claimed tens of thousands of lives in an instant, the slower, more insidious deaths were still to come. By the 4th day, those who had been treated for apparent burns started to display some unusual symptoms. Purple spots appeared all over the affected person's body. They would begin to hemorrhage blood after the smallest of cuts or injections and vomit a foul brown liquid. Hair would fall out in clumps at the slightest of touches as necrosis set in. At the time, doctors had no idea that they were dealing with radiation sickness, an incurable condition that affected those closest to the center of the blast or those who had consumed irradiated material. Many had consumed water from nearby rivers, driven to do so from the intense heat caused by the blast, unaware of the contamination. And what is most disturbing is that some attempted to drink the oily black rain from the mushroom cloud, though they soon realized it was the atomized remains of the city and people who were once around them. The heat and light from the nuclear bombs were of such intensity that they burned patterns from clothing directly onto the victim's skin. Superheated wristwatches became branding implements for those who wore them too close to the hypercenter of the blast. For those who looked directly into the initial intense flash of the nuclear strike, they were left with instant and permanent blindness. For others, cataracts and blindness would follow in a few short years. Though perhaps the most infamous injury associated with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are that of the so-called ant-walking alligator people. The term derives from the now discredited book The Last Train from Hiroshima. According to the eyewitness testimonies compiled by the book, they were now eyeless and faceless, with their heads transformed into blackened alligator hides displaying red holes indicating mouths. The alligator people did not scream. Their mouths could not form the sounds. The noise they made was worse than screaming. They uttered a continuous murmur, like locusts on a midsummer night. One man, staggering on charred stumps of legs, was carrying a dead baby upside down. It is important to note that this book was pulled by the publisher due to fabrication of sources. It is, however, likely that many people were badly burned, dying an incredibly painful death as their very flesh melted. Over the next 2 to 4 months, the effects of the bombs killed between 90,000 to 146,000 people in Hiroshima and 39 to 80,000 people in Nagasaki. For months afterward, many people continue to die from the effects of severe burns, radiation sickness, and all manner of injuries caused by the blasts. All of this made worse by the dire conditions, with illness running rampant and a lack of food causing malnutrition. It is important to remember that a great number of forced Korean labourers were in both cities. It is also impossible to know just how many families were entirely wiped out, leaving no one to report the deaths. Health problems did not end after a few months. Pregnant women exposed to the bombings experienced higher rates of miscarriages and deaths among their infants. Those who were able to give birth had children who were more likely to have intellectual disabilities, impaired growth, as well as an increased risk of developing cancers. This can be seen in the increase in leukemia cases. Leukemia cases rose around 2 years following the blast.
Black shadows of humans and objects, like bicycles, were found scattered across the sidewalks and buildings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, two of the largest cities in Japan, in the wake of the atomic blast detonated over each city on August 6 and 9, 1945, respectively. It's hard to fathom that these shadows likely encapsulated each person's last moments. When each bomb exploded, the intense light and heat spread out from the point of implosion. Objects and people in its path shielded objects behind them by absorbing the light and energy. The surrounding light bleached the concrete or stone around the shadow. In other words, those eerie shadows are actually how the sidewalk or building looked, more or less, before the nuclear blast. It's just that the rest of the surfaces were bleached, making the regularly colored area look like a dark shadow. The intense energy released during an atomic explosion is